What I drive, what I wear, and what I live in doesn't define my character. What defines my character is how I treat the homeless person, how I treat my wife, how I treat someone who doesn't look or believe quite like I do. That's a much better indicator of my character than what I own.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm very grateful that you're here today, and I'm glad that you listen, subscribe, and share these episodes with your friends. That's the way the show grows. You're definitely going to listen and share today's episode because today I have Jay Rifenbary with me. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
So before I introduce Jay, I'm going to tell you a little bit of how we met and why I've been looking forward to this. So Jay, about a month, maybe 2 months, I don't know, ago, came to Milwaukee and to the Chef's Table, which is a fantastic private restaurant experience that I'd never been to before. Jay, would you agree that it's an awesome experience there?
Yes, it was surprisingly wonderful and very unique. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it in regard to the space, the food, the ambiance, and everything that went along with it, and having the owner and the chef right there, and serving what was just a fantastic lunch.
Yeah, it was way over the top for what we deserved. I can tell you that. Another great How Did It Happen story, by the way, with the chef there. But today we're talking about Jay. So Jay was our speaker, and a lot of times when speakers are there to impart wisdom on us or impart experiences on us, and Vistage does a really good job of getting us members in front of people who can really help us either develop personally or professionally. And what was so interesting about Jay, his whole story is interesting. You're going to be blown away by it, but it was the way that Jay just kind of started right off the bat with a story about himself. So rather than right off the bat start, teaching us or imparting his wisdom, he shared a story with us that was personal and meaningful. But more than all of that, it was, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody in the group, but at least for me, it connected us right away. Like, oh, we are two human beings that, regardless of what the resume or the bio and all the other stuff says, we are two human beings who are going through life the same way, with the same opportunities and the same challenges and the same goals and gifts and whatever. It was just a really great way to get started. So as soon as I heard that, I thought to myself, okay, Jay's the kind of guy that I think I want to have on the podcast and share with the rest of you. So that's why he's here today. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Jay. So Jay is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he had a concentration in nuclear physics, which was very interesting to talk about that too. From there, Jay, he's been an airborne ranger, military commander, sales professional, corporate manager, entrepreneur, and he brings a unique background of interpersonal skills and business experience to each of his training and speaking engagements. Jay is the president of Rifenbary Training and Development and the author of the international bestseller, No Excuses, Incorporating Core Values, Accountability, and Balance into Your Life and Career. And we're going to talk a lot about all of those things today because he's got some phenomenal insights and experiences on them. And by the way, this is that book, No Excuse. You should get it. Why you should get it, it's fantastic. In addition to that, don't take my word for it, don't take Jay's word for it, but take Jack Canfield's word for it. He's the best-selling co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. I think that book's probably sold more copies than, I don't know, the Bible. Maybe the Bible sold more. But here's what Jack had to say. Jay has given us a real gift with this book. Anyone who reads and applies the no excuse philosophy daily can create the life they want and make a difference. So exceptionally high praise. That book was awarded the Book of the Year by the North American Book Dealers Exchange. And Jay's also the author of True to Your Core, Common Sense Values for Living Life to Its Fullest, and his most recent release, Return to the Core, Principles for a Purposeful and Respected Life. Now, Jay speaks and consults all over the world, and this is sort of the ice, the cherry on top of all of that stuff. In 2017, he was awarded the Vistage Speaker of the Year, a recognition which, as I understand it, and from my own personal experience with the quality of Vistage speakers, that is exceptionally high praise. So, with all of that, Jay, I know you won't disappoint us. Here we go. I start every podcast with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Well, it's quite a deep and thought-provoking question. Um, how it all happened for me, I would imagine, and I believe for many factors, or from many factors, life experience, people who've been an influence, sports, my own internal desire to prove, to succeed, um, maybe to kind of go beyond what I thought I could do. And there were a lot of experiences growing up that impacted that. As you may recall, we talk about personal honesty in the presentation, and really what is the catalyst for why we make the decisions that we make. And two primary things are needs and fears. We as children, based on experience, will go towards what we perceive we need, and we move away from what we fear. And that very much forms a foundation in regard to why we make some of the decisions we make. The problem that occurs down the road, if we don't recognize that maybe those needs and fears interfere with an understanding of what our personal core values are. So my entire presentation really revolves around a blueprint for character development. And that stems from really not knowing what I wanted to be in life. And as you may recall, one of my favorite line that I start with every presentation is, you teach best in life what you want to learn the most. And think about that. You teach best in life what you want to learn the most. If you love something, you'll find your greatest joy is to share what you love, right? So if you love art, if you love literature, if you love music, sports, the outdoors, gardening, you'll find your greatest joy is to share what you love. And for me, that really begins with the process of losing my father when I was very young. I really didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a role model. I didn't have someone who kind of whispered in my ear little life lessons. And so I was always on a journey trying to discover for myself what it is I should be, or what I might be able to be. I had influences. Certainly my mother was a wonderful human being, and she pushed me down certain paths, especially the West Point path. I had a cousin who was the captain of the Army football team back in the 60s. And so we were exposed to West Point back then. But having lost dad, it was really a moment where I really never knew what I wanted to be. So the journey has allowed me to at least try to discover that, and in turn, help others along the way. So, when it comes to what is integrity and character, what makes people happy and successful, how do people persevere through some of the challenges? All of that was something that I had an interest in. And as a result of that, something beyond I can explain, I've made a life and career over really that journey of searching. And then in turn, as I learn, share some of that insight with others to improve their lives, both personally and professionally. So it's something that I would say is a combination of so many factors, but I really believe, especially now, there was always a bigger plan behind it. And what I mean by that is I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing for the last 30 years if I hadn't lost my father. One of the other major factors that really propelled me in a way to prove was the fact that the year after that I lost dad, mom had me repeat the 7th grade in school. So you can imagine how that impacted my own sense of belief in my own intelligence. And then in turn, that need as a result of that to be maybe appreciated or respected or successful. So, those were some really early childhood. I was only 11. There were some early childhood things that, I could have gone one direction or another direction, but, it allowed me to at least attempt to discover and try new things. And all those, how do you go from nuclear physics in West Point to something like this,
Right. It seems like a natural path.
Yeah, right.
The seventh grade, repeating the seventh grade. What was it? What was it that was going on in Mom's head that made her make that
I think,
decision for you?
in the aftermath of losing dad, she thought it was an emotionally challenging year for me. I was in Catholic school, and it was just a decision she made that, I was pretty young for my age in regard to my other peers and classmates. So she thought another year, would be helpful. And,
Okay.
in the long run, sure, it was very helpful. I mean, when I look at from an athletic perspective, even from an academic perspective, having that extra year was um, uh, developing, to say the least. But I think, at the time, though, I didn't look at it like that. I looked at it as something less than acceptable in regard to what I felt those around me would perceive me as being, i.e., not very smart, pretty stupid, and I was very small too at the time. So, some of those factors.
Did it feel like a punishment of some kind, or is that
Oh,
maybe too
absolutely.
far?
I would say definitely it felt like some level of punishment, some level of humiliation too. I can remember getting on that school bus, seeing friends. Immediately, I perceived everybody around me to think that I was, not very intelligent. So that kind of put me on a path, not at the moment, but as the years went by, wanting to prove to people that I was smart was kind of a catalyst to why do you think I took nuclear physics?
Right.
It wasn't because I liked it. I can share that with you.
How how did it come to that, Jay? How you get into well, let me before I get into the nuclear physics, let me back up to something else you said, and then we'll get into the whole military academy experience. But what you said, and you said this in the workshop, I have my note on it. You teach best in life what you want to learn the most. I think that's the quote, right? So as I hear you say that, I get it, and as I read it, I don't as much. So help me understand. So is that is what do you yeah what does that actually mean? Because I'm thinking to myself, if I teach best in life what I want to learn the most, does that mean that I enjoy engaging people in what I think I know to see what their response to it is, so that I can, I'm still malleable to knowing something more about
Well,
that or differently
I
or
had
what?
such a passion to really understand what brings a level of success to people's lives and contentment and fulfillment, and a sense of peace and calm. And so, as I've been on this journey through the ups and downs along the way, you know, I when I look at getting into the whole speaking career for the last 30 years, um, it was an op when I was with a company called HMSS. It was a home infusion therapy company. This is back in 1989. And I went to a national meeting and I saw the speaker and I really was impacted by what he had to share, but how he shared it. His name was John Brecky. And I just felt that was something that I could do and wanted to do. And I thought, and then after that, believe it or not, I opened up a bookstore. We were living in Kansas City. I moved back to the Northeast, opened up a bookstore that was geared towards personal and professional development that led into speaking. And I all of a sudden realized that I had this gift to be able to share information in a way that I felt was uplifting. But most importantly, it has evolved tremendously where I realized it wasn't about me. I'm just the messenger. And so to bring in my life experiences and my passions for life and again what propels people to achieve, as I've learned along the way from people like yourself and others, and certainly my own experiences and faults and successes, to be able to share some of that insight, especially as it's evolved to the point of really what is character, how does one develop one's character. And as you recall, possibly it all centers around those core values and accountability and personal honesty and integrity. Those are the four major components that very much is a blueprint for character development. So as I've had a passion for it, my greatest joy is to share it. And if it makes a positive difference and impacts others in a positive, constructive way, that's been the surprising thing, because it's all been word of mouth for 3 decades, which is really crazy. And
And
I've
what
built a life and a career over sharing this message and weaving in, the evolving of the message through my own life experience with it. And for some reason, that's where I look at something way bigger than myself. And I know this is my purpose. This is what I'm supposed to.
and when did it occur to you, Jay, that sharing your story was your purpose? Like, because I guess I'm just thinking to myself, everybody's got a story, right? Everybody should write a book. Everybody's got a story. But there aren't very many people who decide or so convinced that their story has meaning for other people that they pursue a career in it, or feel like it becomes their purpose to share the story more and more and more.
Sure. And like, I think that's evolved as well. I think early on, I didn't really, I thought it was more about me. Maybe I'd be the next Tony Robbins or something. And, when you get hit in the head a few times and, you almost lose your family, and, you realize that ego is not a very positive thing. Secondly, humility is a wonderful thing. And thirdly, I really understood the role of vulnerability, because I always believe that we all have a lot more in common than we do different. So I think the role of vulnerability in regard to really embracing that and having the strength to just share some of my hurts and failures, that's what kind of rallies people and unites people um, around the message, because they realize, all right, he's just being honest with us and truthful with us and open with us. And therefore, we realize, again, we have more in common than we do different. So people go, well, I've been through that, or, I can relate to Jay's experience. I can relate to Jay's, separation, a few years back. And then, being blessed to having been reconciled and to celebrate, or reconciling and celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary, this past March. So, all those things, and then relating it to something that's constructive that can be applicable to business, to family, to personal life. That's really been the cool thing about it. It's been wonderful in regard to, I never planned this in one respect. It was like all came together, and it still comes together. And that's why I don't lose the passion for it, because I realize I'm here to be the messenger for the group or the audience. And it's my experiences are just there to validate that I may have some experience and knowledge, and then be able to put real life and meaningful stories align with the message is a critical component to having it all come together.
And you mentioned the separation in the 40 years, and you talked about this a lot in our session, and I'm not going to ask you to do so here. But I did want to make the connection, if you're willing, between, because I think that occurred around the time that you achieved this Speaker Award of the Year recognition. I mean, you were sort of on fire from a career standpoint, and doing and sharing all of this wonderful stuff with so many people, and yet, well, you tell me what you're willing to talk about.
There was definitely internally for me this disconnect. And I also believe this was supposed to happen because of the fact that, I was so passionate in sharing and felt that I was contributing in a way, but there was this level of unhappiness. There was this level of what's missing here. And finally, when we went to the marriage retreat, and afterwards we reconciled that last day, I received the answer, which was basically goes back to my father passing and watching him, being lowered in the ground and realizing that I'm losing the one person I felt worthy of being loved by. No. So my entire life, until that moment, I really never felt worthy of being loved. And why didn't I feel that way? And so there were moments in my life, I'm searching, no matter how many mountains I climbed, seminars I gave, nothing was fulfilling that missing link. And at the end of that presentation, I realized the retreat, I realized that I was loved. And again, you can call it whatever anyone wants to, the sky, the stars, God, the tree. And that was a turning point for me, even at this later stage in my life. And I wouldn't change anything in my life. I really would not. But, all those crazy things in regard to just those turning points, and then having the resiliency and belief, I think that, there's something bigger than this that is the reason why this needs to happen.
Yeah.
So I looked at it like that, and realized I was loved. And for everyone in the audience who's listening, to realize that you are loved, and there's people who love you and respect you and look up to you. And that's a reason why we owe it to people who see us in that light to make sure we take the high road, because there's people counting on us. And you look what's going on out there right now in regard to character and self-respect and selflessness and service to others, and this trend of narcissism, this trend of social media consumption, where many people out there are basing their life on how many likes they get on Facebook, rather than really taking a moment in time to take an assessment in regard to what values really drive their character and drive their decisions. I can share with you, Mike, most people aren't doing that. If you ask a person, a neighbor, give me 4 values that you believe reflect your character. I think that would be a challenging question for some, not all, in regard to, when the curveball's thrown, what's your backstop? Is it your integrity? Is it your creativity, your intellect, your innovation, your resiliency, your perseverance, your loyalty? What are the things that really are the foundation for why you make the decisions you make? And that goes back to, I didn't have that growing up. I really didn't. I mean, I went to Catholic school. Of course, there's West Point, there's those type of things. But yeah, there was just that missing kind of collective understanding. And again, maybe that comes from the lack of mentorship or the lack of those type of influences in my life to ask me that question when I was 12 or 14 or 15, to have some guidance there in regard to a sense of what really develops one's character. And so, again, you teach best in life what you want to learn the most. So as I've learned along the way, that's why it kind of developed into something that I can't explain in regard to, the specifics, other than the fact that I do realize with all my heart, this is my purpose.
As you were talking about, your dad and being gone, I was thinking to myself, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I was thinking to myself, with the love thing, you sort of committed your life maybe to pleasing your dad or the memory of your dad, but he wasn't able to, he was not able to provide the praise. And so you were kind of always like seeking it, but from something that from someone who was no longer able to provide it, at least in a real world way.
Yeah, well, it was more of living up to an expectation that I had no idea what that expectation was.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you created your dad's expectation.
I'm trying to live up to something that I didn't know what I was living up to. Right. So there's a little bit of a loss in regard to emotion and understanding.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for Mom. I mean, she threw me in the swimming pool. She encouraged me to go to West Point. I didn't get into West Point my first year. After high school, I was all set to go to Gettysburg College, and West Point liked my athletic ability. So they offered me a half a scholarship basically to go to a prep school. And I went to prep school looking and saying, no. And Mom kept saying, no, one more, one more. So we ended up at Lawrenceville. I said, what's a year? So actually there was another year between high school and West Point where, again, that was a development year too. I mean, I was exposed to a whole new level of kind of social interaction and academic excellence when you look at an Ivy League type prep school. So I went there for a year as a PG year, and then got into West Point, and the rest is history.
Okay. And is Lawrenceville a boarding school, or is
it?
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, so a year in there, and that's what filled in whatever gaps you needed to get into to West Point.
But still there was always that underlying sense of I am not that smart, right? So it still was a driving factor even then. And so there leads into maybe why I decided you didn't really have a formal major at West Point. Everybody comes out at that time with a Bachelor of Science, but I could focus and concentrate on a certain area. And again, it was more to prove to myself that I had the ability to get through it. And, even it's almost 65 years old this year, there's still those frustration dreams where you feel like, I didn't graduate, or you're looking for your uniforms, or you can't find your room. I'm sure everybody can relate to those frustration dreams on a certain level. And that all stems back from, again, I really believe a sense of anxiety, a sense of non-self belief, so to speak.
Hmm. And what sport were you playing, Jay?
Pardon me?
What sport were you playing?
I was a swimmer.
Swimmer. Okay. So you get into West Point. You've been basically had 2 extra years of grade school and high school, right? By the time you get there, so 7th grade, and then this year between. And how did you? So you show up there. How did you feel?
Well,
Like
I actually was very confident. I
you
have to
were
admit,
okay.
the system's a system, beast barracks, plebe year, and all that. But I really didn't have much concern that I wouldn't make it, other than maybe academically, because athletically I was rocking it. I was a year and a half older than most of my peers, so I was a little bit stronger. And so, yeah, I so the physical fitness test, the 2-mile run, all these things. And the first year you take, at that time, boxing, wrestling, gymnastics, and swimming. So, again, from an athletic perspective, I was, quite confident that I was right up there with the best, so to speak. But I only swam, though. Only swam on the varsity or the JV team for a year, and I said to myself, I want to graduate, because I that had to be the priority. Was in fact academics, and I still you had other avenues to use your athletic ability, which I did. So that's how I earned personally most of my free weekends, was through sports.
And when you got out of the military academy, where were you stationed? What were your responsibilities as a commander?
Well, I was actually an armor officer, so I first went to Fort Knox for what's called the Armor Officer Basic. Stayed there for what's called a motor officer course, and then Ranger School, which was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done, like most people who went through Ranger School would say. And it was Winter Ranger, so January through March. Got married 5 days after graduation. We lost more than half the class. And then the first thing that happened is we went to Germany. So, and my wife Noni followed there shortly after. And so our first assignment was with the 3rd Infantry Division in Germany. Kitzingen, Germany is where we were, West Germany at the time.
Okay. And now I'm going to get back to the bookstore. So, as I recall, you were living in Kansas or somewhere in the middle of the country. Yeah. Kansas City, okay. And you decided to move back home-ish, to move back home and open a bookstore.
Right.
For what purpose?
I had the sense, after I had heard the speaker, and my passion was in this idea of self-improvement, and I just happened to run into this idea called the Creative Mind. It was a bookstore actually in Overland Park, Kansas, and met the owners, and one step led to another. I came home. I said to my wife, I just gave notice, and we're going to move back to the Northeast and open up a bookstore. And I can't, we had a 4 and a 1-year-old. I mean, what were we thinking? So, and we had lived in Germany, Kentucky, Colorado, Kansas. We lived in Joplin, Missouri, then up to Kansas City. So, yeah, it was quite the probably naive would be. I mean, it was such a risk, but we just did it. I mean, that's a crazy story, Mike, because we did it. And, the store didn't make any money, but that led into speaking. And then that's how it all began. That is how it all began. It was after I had a PBS series in 1992. I mean, think about how many years, 29 years ago. So that led into doing the speaking. And I remember being innovative and putting wheels on the bookcases and moving the bookcases out. We'd have brown bag seminars, and people would come in from all over the community. They loved the store. It was right when self-development was happening. It was before, the Borders and the Barnes and Noble even existed. And so that that opened the door, and I just, realized I had something to offer. And so I just kept plugging away. So, and never lost sight of the message and what I wanted to do for others around me.
Okay. You mentioned a PBS series. Was that about the bookstore, Jay?
No. That was actually
Oh,
kind of
okay.
the initial creation of No Excuse. Like
Ah,
No
okay, okay.
Excuse, the book you have is pretty dated, but again, the message never dies. And more of what I shared with your Vistage members and colleagues was more of what's in True and Return to Your Core, my last two books. But
Okay.
No Excuse is a great little it's a foundation for a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and the title's hard to resist too, you know. No. So the bookstore, you mentioned that you kind of got used, or people started to like your story when you were at the bookstore, right? So this is before you had a story in print or whatever. So this is just you talking to
I
people,
realized that
or
if I was going to set myself apart in regard to speaking, I had to create something that was from the heart, unique. And that's how I came up with No Excuse. And it wasn't until a
oh,
friend of mine asked and said, "Wasn't that one of your four answers at West Point?" "Yes, sir, no, sir, no excuse, sir." And sir, I do not understand. I didn't realize that even when I put the program together. And then I really just start off with, what are some, fundamental principles that bring a sense of contentment and fulfillment to people's lives. That idea of purpose and integrity. And then I just thought a crazy thing that happened. I was looking for some, synonyms of values. And, of course I pull out a word thesaurus, pull out the book, a thesaurus. And I just asked myself, what does thesaurus mean? And the word thesaurus actually comes from the Greek and Latin word treasure. I said, what a cool word. So I created the acronym of thesaurus as a treasury of ideas, where each letter in the word thesaurus is a different principle. It's like T is totally forgive, right? Um, H is have self-esteem. The E is elevate your attitude and enthusiasm. And so those are some, again, some dated things that I would discuss. And from there, it's just evolved. And each life experience just matures the message, makes it more in depth and meaningful for people. I mean, personal honesty is something that's very unique in regard to what I share now. The vulnerability piece, my triple crown of leadership, maintaining a level of humanness in the workplace. Vulnerability plus humility plus transparency equals authenticity. And as I share with you, I've never seen such a yearning for authentic leadership in all of my life. I've never seen young people yearning for structure, for discipline. And I'm sharing with you, I won't cross the spectrum of political lines and such, but that sense of really what is important and what does build a level of character in one's life, and what you stand for and what you believe in. And I am always in that process of succeeding. There's always an element of how we treat each other, and I believe we should treat each other with dignity and respect. It doesn't mean I want to protect my family or defend my liberties, but when it comes to engaging with others, I think some of this hatred and dissension, and for many not unexplained reasons, but I think there's a lot of hidden agendas out there that aren't healthy, for families, for ourselves, for businesses, and so that's why I'm really emphasizing on really giving even young people an understanding of how they can build a sense of self-respect and self-worth. And that's that blueprint of character. And again, if you don't start with values, you have no foundation to build from. So that's why having, in an organizational setting, having the people who follow me take a moment in time to write down what I call their core four, four values they feel to be important, and then share it with each other. How insightful is that to find out what other people believe to be important? And that makes a big difference when it comes to rallying a team, especially in the midst and aftermath of COVID and all the anxiety out there, all the, again, social media, all the distractions. I mean, this becomes more important than ever, that people have something to hold on to.
so I want to. Do you mind if we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
I
And
want to
then
dig.
also we can add an element which I'm perfectly comfortable with, is I think, beyond that fundamental foundation of values, I think it's important that there is a component of that there's something greater than ourselves. and we're here for something greater than ourselves. I know that people want to come to work for something greater than themselves. And that's where leadership comes into play, to create a culture where people feel they belong and feel that they're valued. You may recall that I had asked the question for life of how do you inspire others? And the way you inspire people is you make them feel valued. So what are we doing on a daily basis to make those around us feel valued?
Right. So I appreciate the genesis of thesaurus. I did not know that. So that was good to know. You also taught me a new word at our workshop, perspicacity.
Right,
Perspicacity. You said it like everybody knows what that means, and I'm like, I wrote it down. I'm like, perspicacity. Got to look it up. And of course, it means a penetrating discernment, a clarity of vision or intellect, which provides a deep understanding and insight. So it's a beautiful word that I had not been aware of, I guess, or certainly had never used myself. So that was a nice addition to my vocabulary.
Well, the other thing that the journey has allowed me to expand is just an understanding on some level of what's important to other people. One of the questions I asked was, what do you have a passion for? How fun is that to learn about each other,
Right.
about each other's passions and how that comes full circle. But just the life journey has given me some, at least, hint on what's important to others through what they say, their body language. So there's a little bit of empathic growth that has happened over the years as well, which I feel is a great blessing as well.
You mentioned that authenticity in particular is something that's lacking, and you had referenced earlier about maybe social media or the mindset that social media brings along with it might be one of the things that's sort of getting in the way of authenticity being something you see more often. But why is it so hard to be authentic? What, in your experience, what's the biggest challenge that people have with that?
I think there's many influences out there that are impacting people to be something they're not. I think also when one is insecure with themselves, they're looking to the outside to find that sense of security. Well, what if it's not aligned with them? I think it was yesterday or the day before was National Selfie Day. How sick is that? I'm serious. I'm really sick. How sickening and narcissistic is that? We're going to have a National Selfie Day. So we all take pictures of ourselves and throw it on. I mean, what is that about? And I can share with you, no one cares where someone had dinner last night. No one cares. It's one of those things where I just kind of shake my head and go, all this is doing is creating a more superficial self-perception of oneself. And that's the dangerous part. That idea of self-esteem, I can share with you that when that all began, which was, I can blame partly my generation for that, we're going to make our kiddies feel good, then they'll do better. Boy, that backfired big time. Self-respect or self-esteem is defined as pride in oneself, and pride is defined as dignity and self-respect. You can't give that to a human being. You can't give dignity and self-respect to a human being, a child, the person you love. It has to be earned, and it's earned through behavior, and then behavior, that's based on understanding what your values are. So if I believe honesty is one of my values, every time I behave in a way that's honest, it reinforces my sense of self-worth and self-respect. So there's the growth progression in regard to understanding how a degree of self-respect is formed. And then you add that idea of core values and accountability and personal honesty. And the personal honesty piece relates to that, because personal dishonesty are the people who project one thing and live another. So if I'm projecting to the world I'm an honorable man, yet behind the scenes I'm living a dishonorable life, I can't be happy because I'm living an internal lie. And that's why there's no direct correlation between all the stuff that everybody's striving to have and a sense of happiness. Because if there were a direct correlation between all the wealth, fame, power, money, and happiness and happiness, then again, we could take a field trip to the wealthiest places, to the greater Milwaukee area, and then when all the people have the most stuff, be the best example of happiness and fulfillment. Well, why are the people out there who don't have all that much and seem to be pretty content, right? And there's people out there who have all kinds of stuff and are absolutely miserable. And I like nice things, but I've learned at the end of the day, especially at my stage in life, what I drive, what I wear, and what I live in doesn't define my character. What defines my character is how I treat the homeless person, how I treat my wife, how I treat someone who doesn't look or believe quite like I do. That's a much better indicator of my character than what I own. And that's the beautiful thing about this, is that I don't think anybody who might be listening remembers someone who had a positive, enduring impact on their life because of what they had. It was always the content of their character, what they gave more than what they took, and the fact that they believed enough in you, or believed enough in you to share a part of their heart, mind, and soul to make you a better person. That's why we remember our mentors and our role models, our teachers, our coaches. It had nothing to do with stuff. It had to do with the fact that they believed that we could be more than who we are today. And all of us out there have the ability to instill in others, just based on the example that we set, that we can instill in others the belief that they can be more than who they are today.
And do you think, Jay, that you mentioned self-esteem and sort of pointing the, some attention to that as being something that might not have been as good as we thought it was, self-esteem without any attachments to it, like earning self-esteem as opposed to being given self-esteem. But I wonder too, as you were saying that, do you think that's contributed, or what has contributed to what I think is sort of been the squishy definitional decline of things like authenticity and character and honesty, and even your RAD thing that you share with us, reliable and accountable and dependable. All of those things seem like they're very easy to define, but when you get into them, they become kind of tricky, because I'm assuming most people you would approach and ask, do you feel like you have good character, would answer yes, even though other people around them might be like, no, yeah. So I'm just wondering what your take is on that, or if you agree with that.
Several things there. First of all, the idea of character, one has to understand what it is and what's defined as being, right? Yeah. And what are the principles that create one's character? So that's an essential tool. The other thing about, values, and people can say they're this and that until they all of a sudden fall off the wagon, and then they have to take ownership for maybe not living up to that. And then what happens is they make excuses to justify or blame someone else, blame the past, blame whatever it may be, to use to justify why they can't live up to their own expectation. Right. And then back to the self-esteem piece, absolutely. Everybody gets a participation ribbon, a trophy. We don't have to keep score. I think that's just, we were built on the ability to be competitive and strive for excellence. And the idea that we're going to patty cake everybody. Everybody has different attributes, different skills, different levels of success. Not everybody's going to be everybody else. And that's something I think we might be losing, that, this idea of everybody's supposed to be the same. Well, not everybody's the same. We all have different skills and attributes, and we have different weaknesses. And that's where that idea of empathy and acceptance and humility and understanding and trying to build people up, to be better than who they believe they can be, is important when it comes to leadership.
And I have a hard time believing that people actually want or have a desire to be the same as someone else, or the desire to not be as good as they can be. I feel like all of that stuff, the sameness thing, is not something that you are born with. That's something that someone, hammers into your brain. Someone who's lost their own, somehow from whatever, lost their own desire to, not be the same. And I think the same goes for, the desire to keep getting better. I mean, I agree with you. That's an inherent part of being a human being, but it can be taken away from you with, well, I shouldn't say that, because you can only allow it to be taken away with you in most circumstances.
Well, let me give you, first of all, here's two things. When we start comparing, then we begin to get into a realm of despair. Comparing is extremely destructive, because then you're not taking ownership for for where you are with your life. What actions are you taking? I mean, there are people who are going to make a lot more money than I am. There are going to a lot more people out there live in bigger houses than I do and drive fancier cars, right? And if I start comparing them and using them as a foundation for anger or jealousy or envy, boy, that immediately begins to be self-destructive.
Right.
Yeah, the
You forget about the you and you start thinking about the them.
correct. And then the other thing that has been happening is when we are rewarding a lack of effort, right? Look at what's going on out there, regardless of party. You can't find people to work because, oh, why do I have to when I'm getting $600 a week sitting on the couch playing a video game? So that right there undermines any sense of individual growth as far as striving for being better and being different and excelling in something that you feel you could excel in, because all that effort is what builds a greater sense of purpose, also a greater sense of self-respect, with the understanding that you're going to fail along the way, right? That there's bumps that are going to happen. And this idea that we think that success is just supposed to be something that is an easy path. Not at all. And with, you can't grow without failure. I mean, how do you find, if one thing about character, how do you find out what your character is if it's not tested? Right.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, my father passes, that's a test of character. Repeating seventh grade is a test of character. Failing at things in my life is a test of character. So do I just cave in, or do I believe that there's a reason why this happens? Because life isn't what you're given, it's how you take it, I believe. I mean, I don't have control over anything. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I have control over how I'm reacting to the world right now. So, the level of passing the buck and it's everyone else's fault and I'm just a victim, I think is extremely destructive.
I really, so I make an effort, and it's not 100% effort, but I make an effort to live a no excuse life, even before I heard of you or heard of your book, because it occurred to me at some point that nothing in this world is being forced upon me. And that, I know that's not the case for everybody, but for most people in the United States, it's I would think it's probably the case. When you get right down to it, it's what I'm accepting into my life. That's me doing that. That's like an invitation, and if I don't want it, then I don't invite it. But it's all about me. It's like not somebody else isn't making the choice for me. But now it seems like and I don't think anybody really wants that, but it seems like that's what people want to do. Is they want to, whether it's politicians or whatever, they don't, instead of leading, they want to conscript you almost.
They want to create a level of dependency.
Yeah, that's it. Dependency.
That's how they maintain a level of control.
Right.
And again,
what
what I see out there, I mean, we've always gone through times in our society that have been extremely challenging, and I can share this is one that's extremely challenging. I reflect back to 1968, the midst of Vietnam, civil rights, civil unrest on the streets. It was crazy out there, drugs and rock and roll and flower children and, political stuff. We only had 3 TV stations then, right?
Yeah,
think about that. So what weren't we aware of what was going on behind the scenes, But I think that in today's, we're just inundated with so much information. There's people who are grabbing control and power. They're creating dependency. And I really feel, and I'm sure maybe half the audience will disagree, but I thought we were doing really well coming as a nation, coming closer together, be more accepting of difference. I really believe that, and maybe I'm naive or whatever the case may be, but I felt that we were really moving forward as a society and respecting each other. I didn't sense that there was all this dissent and disrespect and racial discrimination and separation and people judging everybody. Maybe I'm just surrounding myself with people who didn't do that. But I thought we were doing real well. And so that's why I'm a little bit, I guess, personally sad that there's so much hatred it seems out there, or people, kind of, you know, pushing people against other people. Because I know for a fact we all have a lot more in common than we do different.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because I think about that all the time with my podcast. So I've done over 200 of these podcasts so far, and I'm very, very sure that there are guests that I've had on the show who would not agree with me on certain things in my life or belief system. And the same would be true of me with them. But we don't talk about that stuff on the podcast. We're talking about something else, something where we do have a common connection or something that we're both interested in or whatever. And there has never been a case so far, and I hope today isn't the case, where the guest on the podcast and I get into territory that divides us instead of territory that brings us together. And I feel like there's way more of the stuff that brings us together, but the only stuff that people want to exploit, and I don't know, maybe there's a better word for that, but exploit are the things that keep us apart from one another.
And again, that goes back to a way of really grabbing some sense of control or power, or at least a sense of righteousness. Growing up, I didn't look at people who were different than I was from an outward perspective or a skin color. I never looked at them as less than me. Never. And I'm an old white guy.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I always believed, and this has been, brought up quite a bit lately, but I always believed in Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement of it's about character, right? It's not, it's in a sense, and to know that there's people who care about one another and there to support each other and uplift one another. There are a lot of people out there who want to help, want to uplift people, want to be there for communities on this type of thing. And I think it's too bad that it doesn't seem to be focused on in regard to what brings us together versus what's pulling us apart, like you had mentioned.
And like you had mentioned social media in the beginning. I'm going to say, and see what you think, person to person, you don't get that normally. You get respectful interactions between people who are willing to help one another achieve a common goal, whether that's at the grocery store or whether that's at work or wherever. Put a sort of a blindfold of anonymity around a keyboard, for example, or something where there's not that immediate personal vulnerability or ramification, and people can become a different person than they would be in a person-to-person interaction. It's almost like they're living in an alternative universe when they put themselves behind the keyboard.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, there's a level of you use the word courage. I mean, it takes courage to be able to be, I think, humble and transparent, and to be vulnerable, and to be humble. And to be authentic. It takes courage because then you have to open up some things that may be uncomfortable for you to explore, where you may be at fault or may not be as sure of yourself. And I find we can all agree to disagree on certain levels, but again, when it comes to a community, when it comes to a family, we're all in this together. And I just wish the high road was taken a bit more lately.
Speaking of community and family, could you share with everybody the Gallagher story, the Gallagher family story that you shared with us? Because maybe that's a good way to put a bow around sort of some of the things we've been talking about.
Well, one of the things we talk about, cultural, corporate core values, then we talk about family core values, and then we talk about individual core values and group values and relationship values, because that's the whole thing. Values are way beyond some fluffy words on the wall. They weave through every aspect of our life. So this is when I spoke in England. It was the first night there, and I was having dinner in the B&B in the gardens in the back, and there were a lot of locals there in Berkshire, England, and they're all looking at me because they knew I wasn't from there. But this one family just kept staring at me and invited me over to their table, and they just started kind of grilling me. Who are you? What are you doing here? And so on and so forth. So I began to explain what I do, and they began to take an interest. And It was the parents, the grandparents, the children who were 16 and 14, give or take a year, and an uncle. And so I got to a point where they were taking interest, where I just said, I said to the parents, do you mind if I ask your children a question? And they went, no. So I asked the kids, I said, so what do you think the core values of the Gallagher family are? And the parents' jaws dropped. But without any hesitation, here was what was remarkable about that. I don't think more than 3 seconds went by. The daughter goes loyalty and accountability. The son goes resiliency and fun. And all I said then to the children, I said, would you mind sharing with your parents, your grandparents, and your uncle some experiences growing up where you felt those values were instilled in you? Man, drop the microphone. It was awesome. Next 30 minutes, they're just talking about some of the experiences growing up where they felt those values were instilled in you. And I would ask every parent out there, when you have an opportunity around the dinner table some night, and I don't care if the kids are 4, 14, 18, 22, what do you think the core values of our family are right now? Because more than ever, I believe that discussion is warranted, needed, relevant. And as a parent, just getting some insight, what your children feel to be important from a value perspective, is absolutely validating, beneficial, maybe surprising, maybe a teaching tool, and opens the door for some further discussion, to have that as that foundation. And I can share with you, that's the one element where I had mentioned to you, I received more letters, notes, phone calls from executives and individual who goes, well, I assume the kids know, but I never really thought about maybe asking them, what are the core values of our family? What holds us together? What's going to hold us through these trying times? And it's a great discussion.
Well, that's an awesome place to end, Jay. I'm really grateful for having you on today. What do you want people to know about you that I have not shared so far?
Well, from a business perspective, they can just go to rifenbary.com. That's my website, RIFENBARY.com. And, my door's open. If people listen to this and want to say hi, communicate, or have any questions or anything, they can explore that. But no, I think that, we could share for hours and hours. We've only hit the tip of the iceberg.
Right. No, this was fun. Jay, thank you so much for being on the show and making time for me.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.